I know I'm not the only one that has seen photos of Indigenous Australians and thought, these people kind of look Indian, South Indian. I mean, I've seen Tamil people that look like this. Even listening to Indigenous languages, it kind of felt Indian, possibly Dravidian.
Rengem namut muran i ibim namaya kumban kadara dari alu ngaya.
Many groups around the world look similar to each other. Some Nepalese look Peruvian, some native Andamanese like Onge can look Ugandan, for example, but with South Indians and Australian Aboriginals, there has to be a connection, right? The only thing that separates them is the Indian Ocean, so it's not impossible for them to be related, right? Well, that's when I came across a few articles that spoke about contact between South Indian traders and Australians about 4,000 years ago. Aboriginal Australian genomes reveal Indian ancestry. Genomes show Indians' influx to Australia 4,000 years ago. These articles refer to a first meeting that can actually be traced genetically to this day. So, what exactly happened all those years ago? The first Australians are said to have reached Australia about 50,000 years ago, passing through Sundaland and ending up in an area that we call Sahul, which connected Australia with New Guinea. And over the course of a few thousand years, starting around 16,000 BCE, as sea levels rose due to the end of the Ice Age, this area took on a shape that we now know as Australia. For those 50,000 years, the Aboriginals of Australia stayed pretty isolated compared to the rest of the world. They developed their own unique cultures, beliefs, languages, and traditions. They had limited contact with outsiders, interacting with people from the islands nearby. There's evidence of Australian groups from Cape York Peninsula having contact with Papuans, and also evidence of the Yolngu people of the Northern Territories having contact with Makassar traders from Indonesia for hundreds of years. But outside of these interactions, they stayed mostly to themselves. Genetically, their closest relatives outside of Australia are Papuans, and therefore they are also related to other Melanesian groups. They are also related to Negrito groups in Southeast Asia. This is because they are descendants of the first migrations into Australia, the same migration Papuans and Negritos are from. Now, what do these papers that I mentioned say about Indian migration into Australia? Did it happen? Can we see it genetically? What type of a cultural impact did it have? One genetic study done on Australian Aboriginals from the north of Australia showed evidence of substantial gene flow from India, estimated at around 4,200 years ago or 141 generations ago if a generation is measured at 30 years, with some saying that it could have actually been as recent as 2,100 years ago, as a generation in many of these communities was probably more like 15 years and not 30. The genetic component was said to be as high as 11% in some individuals. The two theories surrounding how this DNA entered Australia are through Indonesian traders having Indian ancestry or directly from the Indian subcontinent, most likely southern India. This ancient Indian DNA input is only seen in ethnic groups in the Northern Territories and not spread throughout Australia. These migrations align with the time period where specific stone tools started being used in Australia as well, and also this was supposedly the introduction of the Australian dingo, which is theorized to have come from India as a relative of the Indian pariah dog. However, both of these theories have been challenged. Professor Ian Lilly of Queensland University argues that stone tools were developed out of necessity at a time when there were changes in climate making hunting quite difficult. Also, there is evidence that the ancestor of the dingo originated in Southeast Asia and not the Indian subcontinent. Some also theorize that the Pama-Nyungan languages, the largest indigenous language family in Australia, actually comes from Dravidian languages in South Asia because of their many similar phonological features, as it is believed that this language family originates in northern Australia and developed around 5 to 6,000 years ago in what is now Burketown, which is not too far off from the time frame that these supposed Indian migrations happened. However, there isn't really much evidence for this, and the similarities of these languages are most likely just coincidences. So, hearing all this, you may think, okay, we might see some slight Indian DNA in Northern Australia, but it's not widespread at all. So, why do Indigenous Australians look Indian? Well, first of all, it's because both of these groups are humans with dark skin and most of the time straight to curly hair. However, there is a genetic connection in East Eurasian DNA. East Eurasian refers to being descendants of our initial Upper Paleolithic migrations into eastern half of Eurasia. All East Eurasian people have a common ancestor in this basal East Eurasian group that ended up going different ways and becoming the ancestors of Australasians, South Asians, and East/Southeast Asians. Indians in general, especially South Indians, have around 50% East Eurasian DNA, coming from a group we call the AASI, aka Ancient Ancestral South Indians or South Asian Hunter-Gatherers. This group developed in South Asia between 60 to 40,000 years ago. However, this genetic component does depend on the ethnicity, geographical area, and many times even caste. Australian Aboriginals are also from these East Eurasian migrations. They are an East Eurasian people, with it being the vast majority of their DNA because of their historical isolation. Indigenous Australians also developed certain features like straighter hair, just like Indians. This is seen throughout the majority of ethnic groups in mainland Australia, maybe due to a genetic bottleneck that made it so tight Afro-textured hair became rare, which now leaves us with straight to curly hair, a feature many South Indians also have. Indigenous Australians' closest relatives, Tasmanian Aboriginals, Papuans, Negritos, have Afro-textured hair, and these are all East Eurasian populations as well. So due to convergent evolution, making it so Indians and Australian Aboriginals developed similar features, they look alike. Convergent evolution meaning developing similar traits due to environment. That, plus the fact that these are both East Eurasian people, is why Indians and Indigenous Australians could look alike. It seems that Australian Aboriginals developed their phenotype mostly independent of any South Asian admixture. There is still ongoing research on this topic, but not that much solid information has come out on how these Indian migrations impacted Northern Territory's communities outside of genetics. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that this 4,000-year-old genetic connection between India and Australia was kind of like debunked or something, but I can't find that article, so let me know if you guys do. But it seems like the only reason Indigenous Australians and Indians look alike is because of convergent evolution and this common ancestor in this basal East Eurasian group. So they are quite related if you go back far enough. So while it is tempting to look at surface level similarities like skin tone, facial features, or even language sounds, and draw a deep historical connection, the reality is more nuanced. Yes, there is some genetic evidence suggesting contact between South Indians and Northern Australian Aboriginals around 4,000 years ago, and yes, there are a few overlapping cultural timelines. When we dig deeper, most of the similarities we see in South Indians and Indigenous Australians likely come down to a mix of shared ancestry, convergent evolution, and human tendency to find patterns, even when there are none. At the end of the day, both of these groups are descendants of the earliest human migrations out of Africa, and their stories are a part of a much bigger and older human journey across the planet. The idea that people separated by thousands of kilometers and tens of thousands of years could still look alike or share echoes of each other's culture, that's not just fascinating, it's a reminder of how connected we all are. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you've come across any more recent research on this Indian-Australian connection, definitely drop it down below. I'd love to look into it. Also, thank you guys for 1,000 subscribers, it means a lot, and let me know what video you want to see next.